Hi, everyone. This is Jason Burak of Wall Street for Main Street. Welcome back to another Wall Street for Main Street podcast interview. Today's special guest is a first-time guest. He has decades of financial industry experience turning around companies in the United States and Europe, distressed assets, contrarian investing. He's also an entrepreneur. He founded the Tocqueville Bullion Reserve. I believe it was just called the Bullion Reserve, and I think Tocqueville now runs it with John Hathaway. Simon Mikhailovich, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Simon, besides the introduction there, I didn't mention also that you also have unique experience because you were born into the Soviet Union, you survived socialism, you escaped it, you became a successful businessman in the United States and Europe. So how do you feel when you see and hear so many Americans say that they want socialism? The polling is just exploding now, how many Americans are in favor of it, and a lot of Americans now, Simon, actually associate nothing negative with socialism. So from someone from your background, how do you feel about hearing and seeing?
Well, I think there's a deep misunderstanding on the part of most people as to what socialism is. Before discussing something, people should always agree on the definitions of what the terms that they're using so that they're talking about the same thing. So first of all, socialism is from the word social. It's an economic system whereby the means of production are jointly owned or owned by society in general. So socialism is a system where there is no private property means of production. I don't think that most people understand that who like social. I think they like socialism in a sense of social justice, in a sense of fairness, equal distribution, or not equal, but fair distribution of wealth, but not the actual socialism, which is where I was born in the Soviet Union, that had a socialist economic system paired with a totalitarian communist ideology. Now, socialism typically comes with some sort of ideology because if the government owns everything, then the government controls everything. If the government controls everything, then that by definition is a totalitarian system. The biggest lesson of history, as we all know, is that people don't learn from history. It is quite appalling, I have to say, to have grown up in that system, to have escaped it with $100 in a suitcase, and having to give up your citizenship while doing it, to be ending upstate with $100 in a suitcase in the West and building from scratch, and then watching that experiment collapse under its own weight, spectacular, near 30 years ago. It's kind of befuddling to watch people go back to the same well, as if the Soviet Union didn't try hard enough. It's like they didn't do it right. So there is no precedent in history for socialism to work. I mean, it's been tried in many places, but it has never worked out. And so it's a little strange that people are rushing. Now, we can discuss it. There are many good reasons why people are looking for an alternative to the current way. I understand that, but going something that so blatantly was, failed, completely credited, proven to not work, that is quite something.
So many of the proponents of socialism would say that all the failures of socialism, whether it was the Soviet Union or Venezuela more recently, were not real socialism. So how would you respond to that?
I would respond with a wonderful Yogi Berra line that said, in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice, but in practice there is. So the idea of pure socialism, just like the idea of pure communism, always run into the reality of human condition and human passions and so forth. I mean, the fact that people don't learn from history, it's not a new concept. It's in the Bible. It says there's nothing new under the sun. It's right there in the Ecclesiastes. That there's nothing new under the sun, and that whatever has been shall be again, and that we don't remember those or what happened to people who came before us, and those who come before us won't remember what happened to us. So that level of self-knowledge of human goes back thousands of years. So to say that they're not doing it correctly and that there's some other way of doing it more correctly, I mean, okay, you can say it, but it's been tried many times.
It sounds like the straw man argument, Simon, where they can't defeat. So someone who knows all the definitions of socialism, like you said, and all the problems that the Soviet Union collapsed, and can name all the examples of problems in Venezuela with the government of Hugo Chavez and Maduro, and then the socialist, someone who's always pro-socialism, it's morphed into a religion. And so rather than arguing with people about the facts on that, they've developed a straw man and just saying that wasn't real socialist. That's their always number one excuse.
If anybody wants to visit socialism, I just suggest you go and spend a little time at the Motor Vehicles Administration that's near you. That's socialism. That's what it looks like in real life.
So do you think this rise, is it a combination of things like brainwashing from, I graduated college with 2 degrees, and almost all my history professors were socialists or Marxists, so they had enormous bias. They loved FDR. They never said anything bad about him when I took American history classes. And do you think that plays a part, the way the university system is set up? And then also, do you think if the economy, the real economy in the United States, I know Trump is saying how great the economy is, but we're just seeing, record amounts of credit card debt in 2018, and then also the auto loan payments are way past the default date. So do you think if the real economy was better, that less people would be in favor of socialism?
Look, socialism and communism, for those who care to look deeper beyond the label, actually it's very appealing in theory, right? So what are I can't fully explain it to people that have not gone through that experience because it's inexplicable and explainable. But just take it, my word for it, that I grew up in a country where we were told from the kindergarten on that we live in the most just, peace-loving, free society that was ever created on earth, that we were the shining city on the hill, and that we were the beacon of freedom for common people, for all progressive mankind. What's not to like about it? And that nobody's exploiting anybody, and that there's equality, there's fraternity, and there's equal opportunity. I mean, meritocracy, social ladders. I mean, do you think this language was invented in this country? No, this is how I grew up, and so it obviously it didn't comport with reality. Although most people went along with that, but that was that's what we were told, and that we were taught that our court system is the most just, and that we are the most peace-loving, and that we're for peace. And everywhere there were white posters with white doves. Soviet Union was the most free and the most just society. Well, of course, none of it was true, and I'm not trying to make light of it. But the point that I'm making is just because somebody is saying something that sounds good doesn't mean that it's so. And so when a lot of people are clinging to the idea or the ideal of socialism, which is peace, fraternity, equality, just liberty, these are wonderful words, and they're ideas to aspire to, but it just doesn't work in real life. I mean, it just doesn't work. I mean, I've lived it. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work not because people didn't try to make it work. It is inherently flawed. And the reason it's inherently flawed is because it relies on the concept that people can own things together, and somehow a system where means of production are owned by the society can work. And it doesn't work because people are not all the same. I mean, we just have to look at each other to know that we're not all the same. Look at the members of our own families. Some of us are more hardworking than others. Some people are more honest than others. Some people are more whatever. I mean, try to go on a trip with a bunch of people, particularly who are not your long-term friend, and start sharing expenses and stuff like that, and see how well that works for a long time. And particularly when trouble starts. I mean, that's what people don't kind of understand. It's a system of communal sharing of everything where not everybody is the same. And so while some people may be pulling hard towards the common goal, other people are happy to let other people pull and ride along. And that's why it doesn't work, because because what seems like a fair allocation spoils turns out to be deeply unfair in reality.
I 100% agree. And George Orwell's book Animal Farm talks about this, where all the animals on the farm are supposed to be equal, but some of them end up being more equal than others and running things and getting better food and more food and all these other perks. And so, in the United States, I think a lot of people realize how corrupt the system is. There's just so many corruption scandals, whether it's the latest one with the college entrance exams and the bribes. There's just so many of them. So I guess some of the socialists are promising people more equality, less corruption. But having lived in the Soviet Union, I'm sure you could tell me and our listeners that there was also a lot of corruption in the Soviet Union as well.
No, Jason. It's not that there was a lot of corruption. There was nothing but corruption. I mean, again, for people to really understand what this is all about, you don't need to think of any high intellectual matter. You just pay attention to your own municipal operation, the trash elect, how municipal contracts get allocated. Look at the corruption right here in this country, because this doesn't have this particular, what we're talking about now, doesn't have anything to do with capitalism or economics. It has to do with how humans behave in certain circumstances. How can you have a bureaucrat who makes, in this country, I don't know, $50,000, $60,000 a year, and he's a decent person, and he works for a municipality, and he's in charge of awarding multi-million-dollar contracts to developers or builders of roads or builders of sewer systems or whatever, and he has the ability to make a decision whether this developer gets it or that developer gets it. He has the power to bestow millions on somebody, and he is making $60,000. How can there not be corrupt ever? I mean, okay, some people are honest reason, but not everybody's honest. And the temptation is just impossible to overcome. So imagine the Soviet Union, a system where everything was owned by the government. So there was always some bureaucrat, and I don't necessarily use that pejorative. Let's say it's public servant. There was a public servant, modestly paid public servant, who had ability to allocate sources that didn't belong to this person. Of course, that person wanted to be compensated something for allocating it to this party and not that party. To say that this doesn't happen is deny human nature. It happened. That's, by the way, part of the problem we have here. When the government becomes very large, that is socialist. And so when we see corruption in government, when we see corruption in high places, when we see, how elections are perverted by money, I mean, people think that this is not socialism. They think socialism is something else. This is not capitalism. Capitalism is the system. Pure capitalism is a very harsh system that is not necessarily all good, in its pure form, but it's a very harsh system that nevertheless, at its very core, has a ingenious way to harness human condition, human nature, to perform for everybody. So nobody tells anybody to open a hot dog stand or to start a shop or to start anything in capitalism. People do it out of self-interest, and they do it out of self-interest, and that creates value for others. And the flip side of the real capitalist system is if you fail, you fail. If you succeed, you reap the rewards, and if you fail, you have to start again. That's just that. So all the bailouts in this country for the past 35 years, going back to Chrysler and Continental Illinois, and moving forward 2000 crisis and the 2008 crisis, this has nothing to do with capital. This is pure socialism, or you can call it statism, however you want to call it, but it doesn't have anything to do with capitalism. So I would like to say this. If you compare, what people are trying to find some middle ground, right? They're trying to have the best features of capitalism, the best thing, socialism. And the problem is that capitalism is very good at growing pie, and socialism is very efficient at allocating spoil, but very bad at growing pie. And that's really what story is. So the capitalist system creates spoils, does not properly allocate spoils. It leads to disenchantment and disaffection among the population, particularly those segments of the population who did not get. They clamor for more spoils. They drive towards socialism, and then the socialism redistributes the spoils and destroys the pie. And the pie gets eaten, and then everything collapses, and we have to start again. That's the history of capitalism, socialism, trading places. Happened in Russia, happened in Eastern Europe, Venezuela, many other places.
I think you brought up a very important point. So right now, Simon, I think we have, all these major governments, economies, central banks, they all seem to want to devalue their currencies. Here in the United States, taxes are being layered on across the board despite the Trump tax cuts. My tax bills for state and local are going up, layered on, whether I, go out to eat or car tax or all these other things are being layered on across the board. And I just hear of the populism is rising, but a lot of people are blaming these problems with currency devaluation. Their standard of living is basically drastically being destroyed over time with currency devaluation and taxes, and they're blaming it on capitalism. And I'm trying to educate people that you cannot blame it on capitalism, because I agree with you, we haven't had real capitalism for a long time.
Well, right. This is a very deep problem that I think is not very well understood by most people. It is difficult to talk about it in the format in which we are, because it's a really vast issue. But I think if I may just share a little bit of my thinking in terms of what's going on and why people are feeling the way they are. But if you go back 1971, when Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard, the gist of, people are very ideological about gold and about gold standard. Let's just take that right out and not worry about it. The gist of the gold standard is simply to limit government's ability to spend money. That's really all it is. It means that the amount of money available for spending is limited by the availability of gold. I mean, you could pick something else, but through history, people picked gold for a lot of good. And so that's really what it was. So when the United States has created social programs in the 1930s, and then layered on more social programs in the 1960s, and then we went to war in Vietnam, and we essentially squandered the wealth that we have created post-World War II. And the government was in a position by the early 1970s where the French were basically sending destroyers across the Atlantic to pick up the gold, being unwilling to be paid in dollars. And so the gold reserves of the United States started to diminish. Nixon administration realized that, and they stopped convertibility of dollars to gold. That was the beginning of the Great Inflation. That was a restructuring restructuring in the 70s that caused a tremendous dislocation because the money became worth less. And I'll tell you, during the 70s, the dollar lost % of its purchasing power. And it happened during several years of 70s, particularly acutely. There was also an oil crisis. There were other things. But fundamentally, the United States defaulted on its obligation in real money, in specie gold, in 1970. After the decade of 1970s, we had, Reagan was elected. Paul Volcker became, even before that, became the chairman of the Fed. And Paul Volcker essentially put the dollar back on some standard. He jacked up the rate 20%, and he said, no more cheap money. We're gonna make the dollar real again. That created tremendous recession. But out of that came Reaganomics, which did a couple of things. One, it cut the tax, you recall, and two, it didn't cut spending. And so if you look at all the charts of debt growth, you will see that everything goes back to that period of starting in 19. My interpretation of that episode is that essentially the United States at that moment should have, well, I'm not saying what we should have done or could have done, but essentially we lived through a crisis which we did not address. And so instead of addressing fundamental problems in our economy, in the way we were creating wealth, we started borrowing money to supplement our lifestyle. And that continued. And then in the 90s, it got worse because we started outsourcing our production offshore. Essentially, globalization has devalued labor by bringing to the market labor from developing countries who were not a part of the global economy prior to that, who were willing to work for virtually nothing. So American workers were put in competition with people who were willing to work for pennies a day. You can't win that. And American companies took advantage of that by sending production offshore. That, by the way, was the policy of our government. I mean, GATT Treaty and the Clinton administration were very much supportive. So it's not pure quote-unquote capitalism that did it. It was an avowed policy of our administration to promote globalization. Now, partially maybe because we felt that we would co-opt China by giving them the production and making them rich so that they would become like us. Well, what they became a rich communist. So they're just as radical as they have ever been, except now they have money, where before they had nothing, thanks to us. So that's one thing that happened. The other thing that happened is there's been a major technological revolution in telecommunications, which made globalization possible because you can't make you can't produce stuff in China if it costs you $50 a minute. Whatever it used to cost a ridiculous amount of money to make long distance calls, and there was no way to communicate. So the communications revolution, technological revolution, computer science, telecommunication, finance, and offshoring, all of that essentially has created a condition where the value of labor has declined dramatically. And not only the value of labor, but the bargaining power of labor. Because as the productivity increases, as the automation breaks down the task into smaller and smaller units, you have less and less qualification required to perform any one of the units of labor, and therefore the value of any given unit becomes less, and therefore the bargaining power of the person who is performing that work diminishes. That's where the unions got short, because all of a sudden, fine, you don't like what's going on here, we'll send the production to China. You don't like what's going on here, we'll fire everybody and we'll hire somebody else, because the work that you do is no longer that specialized. Not that highly skilled. So all of the things are systemic problems. You have to understand why we're talking about socialism, capitalism now. We're talking about it because we have a real problem. Because the system that we have, and by system I don't mean capitalism or socialism, I mean the system as it is, whatever. We can name it whatever we want to name it.
Corporatism or fascism or
whatever. It's some sort of a crony capitalism. Part of the issue here is the and I go back to gold standard and the lack of limitation of money, is that's a big part of the problem. Because again, this is not an ideological statement about gold standard and gold being money or anything like that. It's just once you remove the constraint on credit create, who gets the credit? People with the most credibility. Who are the people with the most credibility? The larger entity, the larger company. So this is a vicious cycle that encompasses everything in the society. And what ends up happening is the more funny money there is, the more of this money, the larger entity, the more consolidation there is, the cheaper it is for them to finance their operations and to gobble up people, the more hard it is for the little people to remain competitive. I was just in a meeting with some, high-tech, manager who actually made a very interesting observation, which I did not know, that Facebook and Google account for, I forgot what the exact number is, but it's like over 9% of online revenue.
Almost 100%
advertising revenue. Yeah, advertising revenue. Right. And everybody else is fighting for the remaining few percentage points. So this is not capitalism. This is oligopolism. This is what in the 1900s Teddy Roosevelt, the trust bust. This is what it was all about. We're back. We're back there, and nobody's bust trust. There is no antitrust. There is no law enforcement. I mean, what kind of capitalism is it when there's no rule of law? When you can have the Wall Street banks, do what they did in 2008, and nobody goes to jail. What kind of law-abiding society is that?
Exactly, Simon. You have to have freedom of speech. You have to have rule of law. You have to have private property rights in order to maintain capitalism, and you have to have bankruptcy. So you have to have all those things working together, cooperation and competition, and then honesty and integrity in the system. So if someone cheats or goes bankrupt, they get punished, and we're not having
Correct.
that.
You have to have system has to be moral, because if there's no morality, our country does not work. Founding fathers knew that, and they said it, that this system, this American system, was set up for a moral society. Because a society is amoral. I mean, look at you gave the example of this scandal that's going on right now with the colleges. I mean, it just perfectly channels the zeitgeist, the sense of the time of the people people with money, willing to spend. Look, we all love our children, and no matter how much money or how little money we have, most people, out of love of their children, will do a lot. But it takes a certain breakdown in moral fiber, and I don't want to use highfalutin words here, but I mean, that's the truth. For people to just blatantly do something like that, to just buy their way into college through just rigging the test, and bribing colleges. I mean, this is Soviet stuff. This is what they used to do in the Soviet Union.
Or Roman Empire the last couple hundred years.
Roman Empire. Exactly. So I think we have a fundamental problem. I think this problem is eating at us at our side. It's a problem at multiple levels. We essentially have been living on borrowed money for a long time. This is running out. I mean, this ability to do that is running out. It's just mathematical, because at some point, you have to service the debt. The interest rate's near zero. The Fed has tried to raise the rate. As soon as they try to raise rates, everything, the markets go down sharply. Markets go down sharply. That's the stabilizer for confidence. And look, I mean, a confidence-based system cannot exist without confidence. So when your money is not backed by anything, when your debts are not backed by cash flows that can be used to repay the debts, then it's just a confidence. And every confidence game in history has always ended with the loss of confidence. And so will this.
So Simon, it's a question of when and not if, and what the next global financial system is going to look like. So you're in the gold business. Is any government going to voluntarily want to go back to gold? Because China, the last 10 years, China's gone crazy with the amount of credit it's issued to. So they are accumulating a lot of physical gold. Their citizens, with their savings, are buying gold. But China's just gone nuts with the money and credit creation the last 10 years, too. I don't see China going to a gold standard, because if they do, wouldn't people want to start pulling the gold out of China then?
Look, let me just explain. So you said I'm in the gold business. I'm not really in gold. I'm in a wealth preservation. Gold is not something I have any ideological affinity to. I'm not a gold bug. I found gold as a solution. I spent 35 years in the investment management industry. The last 5 of it related gold. So I see that as a tool that is relevant to the time. It's like when your journeyman comes to fix something, he brings a little bucket of tools or a little roll that he unrolls, and he has all these different tools there. That's exactly how I view gold. It's the right tool for a particular job. We're in a situation when, essentially, to put it more simply, financial assets got overproduced. And when you have overproduction of something in the industrial sense, right, there's a excess inventory, and this excess inventory has to be liquidated eventually. And so what companies do, some companies end up going out of business because of that. But, when something's not selling, they sell it for whatever they can get, clear the books, and start again. That's kind of what happened. We have created this massive overhang of financial claim that is excess, and this inventory needs to be liquidated. And nobody's willing to liquidate it because it's fraught with to the pension funds, to the wealth, to everything, to the political system. So nobody wants to liquidate. So in this environment, I concluded a number of years ago that you had to own something that was not implicated in this overproduction, something that was not in unlimited supply, something that was liquid and ubiquitous and globally recognized. And I just came to gold as that item. I mean, you could come to many other things. There are many other things that are not part of the finance system, many other real assets. The problem is most of them are not liquid, and most of them are not uniform. And so that's really why gold. And that's why it's important to understand that, because whatever the governments do or don't do with gold, it's almost that speculation. We don't know who's going to do it. China is going to do this or not. But I can tell you this, China is accumulating gold like crazy. Russia is accumulating gold like crazy. Why? Because they are essentially on the other side of the financial system that the United States happens to control. And so they're seeking independence from the United States and from the financial system. And they're using gold as their tool to achieve that independence. And that's why, So I'm not interested in gold because I'm in the gold business. I'm in the gold business, or I went into the gold business because I became interested in gold, if you will. So I think that I would suggest that people not try to guess who's going to do what, but simply look at the alternatives available for them to store their savings, and consider the possibility or the inevitability that financial claim will have to be devalued. Because every dollar of debt, somebody's asset. So if somebody owes $1, somebody holds that dollar on their balance sheet as an asset. So if all the dollars of debt cannot be paid back in real value, what it really means is that the assets people hold, think that they own this, that their wealth in this asset is not fully there. And then different assets, some of them may be worthless, some of them may be worth less, some of them may be worth the full amount. We don't know. Until the smoke clears, we're not going to find out. So that's how I see gold. I don't see gold as a sort of some sort of mythical something. I just see it as a source of independent store of wealth that is universally liquid, universally recognized, has no counterparty, is not anyone's promised form. It is what it is, and it's in very low demand, which as an investment person, I like things that are, in low demand currently but have potential to be very high demand.
I was going to add, Simon, that it sounds like the stuff you described gold as, it sounds like you see it more as an insurance policy rather than as something that's like a guaranteed winning investment.
Okay, what is an insurance policy? An insurance policy is something for which you pay a little, which pays back a lot, something happens, right? Mm-hmm. That's what gold is. So it could be a speculation, but something needs to happen for the speculation to work out. And therefore it's insurance. So because there's such a low demand for it, it can be purchased today for a certain amount of money, and if demand for it increases, and it would under the kinds of circumstances we're talking about, then, when demand increases and supply is limited, then the price has to go up. That's to clear the market. That's how I see gold. Yes, I see it as insurance, and I see it as an asymmetric, insurance. I mean, what was the big short during the 2008 crisis? That's exactly what it was. It wasn't a short. That's a misnomer. It was actually a long, and I was fortunate to participate in it. We bought insurance on the default of collateralized debt, and they default, and the insurance paid. That's what it was. So I just see gold as a similar. It's just not a contract where somebody promised to pay you. It is what it is in itself, which is what attracted me to it, because in the last cycle, the last crisis, for example, Lehman Brothers did not pay out on our policy because they went bankrupt. Others, so we did well, but Lehman didn't. So in a situation where more than one bank can't pay, even if they don't go bankrupt, they just can't pay, or the government says you don't pay because we don't want you to go bankrupt, therefore these contracts are null and void. Then you win, but you don't get paid. With gold, that kind of doesn't happen. Nobody needs to fulfill any promise.
Well, unless, Simon, the government, like the U.S. government, already taxes gold as a collectible. So if you bought gold 10 years ago, you don't get any long-term capital gains taxes on gold. And governments in the past have threatened like these windfall profit taxes. They threatened to do it on oil in the United States when the oil prices rose rapidly. So the governments can always attempt to change the rules.
Yes, the government can always attempt to change the rules, and people can always attempt to change the government under which they live. So, that's why we have voting. I mean, the reality is, I don't know why people say, get out and vote. I mean, ultimately, people have the power. They do. They don't exercise it. I mean, look at the turnout in the election. 50%, 60%. 95% of the people came out to vote, and they voted for what they really wanted. Maybe they'd get it, but people don't do it. So that may be part of the issue. No?
Well, do you think if a lot of people did come out in the next election and voted for socialism, and socialism, the socialists, we have some socialist congressmen now like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her Green New Deal proposal, which I don't think is going to get passed right away, but that doesn't mean they're not going to give up on it and try to pass it for the next 10, 20, 30 years or so. $93 trillion estimate, some ridiculous amount. She's proposing not only redistribution of wealth, she wants to own the means of production too for certain industries, so she wants both.
Well, look, I mean, that takes us back to the conversation about socialism. I mean, it's understandable why politicians of that nature appear in this moment in time, right? It's clear that the existing system is not performing as it should for the majority of the people, and therefore there are populists both from the right and the left, which, by the way, sounds very similar. If you go and you listen to the socialists, and then you listen to somebody like Steve Bannon, and you try to be objective and just listen carefully to what both sides are saying, you're going to hear a lot of very similar things. The solutions proposed are different, but the complaints are the same. The analysis of the ineffectiveness and the problems of the current system are shared by both populists on the right and popular left. And so, in that sense, it's a bad situation. I don't know how to say it any other way. It's a bad situation. It happened in many countries. When things go bad, it tends to give rise to politicians who promise, and I'm not even saying they do that out of some sort of, what's the word? They don't do it callously. Many of them doesn't believe it. I mean, they're sincere in what they're offering. It just doesn't work, right?
What also worries me the most, Simon, is that I think there's very little Americans now who are willing to do compromise and moderation. It seems there's a lot of rise of like radicalism, and this populism, like you said, is from both sides. They have some things in common, but they don't really want to talk to each other politely or friendly or have any polite discussions or debates anymore. And I think, I hope I'm wrong about this, but things are looking like it's headed towards like some type of violent ideological civil war in the next 15 years. I hope I'm wrong about this, like I said. But the other thing is, if like enough of these socialist politicians like Ocasio-Cortez and others get elected, what I'm most worried about is that what's left of free speech will be totally eliminated. So for you and me even having this discussion, like you brought up the duopoly or monopoly that Google and Facebook have on online ad revenue. This video is going to get demonetized. It's going to get very little views, because even though it should get a lot of views, because we're talking about socialism and we're having an honest conversation here, and the people at Google and at Facebook don't want to hear this. So
that's a huge problem. That's a real problem. That's happening already. I mean, that's all around. I mean, think of what the words political correct. What does it mean, political correct?
It's from cultural Marxism, right?
Well, it is. It's not saying things that are offensive to other people. And there's a difference between not saying things that are offensive to other people out of courtesy, out of, comity and, social rules. It's the other thing to be punished for saying things that people don't like to hear. That's the difference. Freedom of speech is not about just everybody should say ugly things, but it's about somebody's right to express their opinion however they want to without right?
Exactly. And the consequences are starting to escalate. So people are losing there's people being doxxed. Look what Tucker Carlson said. He's risking losing all of his state advertisers are trying to get him kicked off his TV show that he hosts. I mean, there's countless examples of this. Now, obviously, people are not going to the gulag yet, but if enough socialist politicians get elected, that's what has me worried.
Well, look, I don't know about the gulag. I mean, that was extreme totalitarian system. Look, I grew up well after. I mean, certainly we have members of the family who spent time in jail, members of the family who survived the siege of Leningrad. I'm not as far removed from privations and the terror of what was going on as somebody who grew up here. But when I was growing up, it was a lot more subtle. I mean, if you told a bad joke, you could end up in jail for 3 years. But if you didn't tell a bad joke, if you were politically correct, nobody was coming to take you away. If you said bad things or you criticized the government, you would lose a job. You may end up, in the KGB office being asked, what are you talking about? What's going on? You may end up in jail. You may end up in a psychiatric hospital. People did. But it wasn't like, but you had to be actually sane. And so it wasn't Stalin's gulags. It wasn't quite like that at that point. But people were self-censoring then. So they realized they adapted to the system and understood, if I don't say this in public, then I won't get in trouble. Correct. Right. So you got gathered around the table in your kitchen and your friends came and everybody talked whatever, and you put the telephone, just like now, the telephone is listening to everything you're saying. I don't know if your listeners have noticed. I've talked to a lot of people. I mean, I'm sure you see it on Twitter. You say something, some word, and the next thing you know, you get an email with an advertisement for that, whatever that is. It's happened to me a number of times. It reminds me of my childhood, because every time we would want to have a conversation, we would have to take the phone and put it under the pillow, so that whatever microphone was embedded in there couldn't hear us. So I feel like I should be doing the same thing with my cell phone these days. But yeah, that's how we live. And I certainly hope that I don't have to see that again. That would be a horrible tragedy, to run away from there and to end up with a similar thing. But I think this system needs to be reformed. It genuinely be reformed, but socialism is not the right solution. It's like, because somebody has a loan, you don't need to cut off their head, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Changing the system does not mean going to an extreme that is proven not to have worked. Time and time again. And to say that the Soviets haven't tried hard enough is to besmirch the memory of all those who died trying.
I completely agree. Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, over 100 million people died from their own government during socialism, in the 19th and 20th century combined.
That is correct. That's a number I've read. So to say that this hasn't been tried hard enough, that we have a better method, that somehow it's going to work a lot better, I don't think so.
Well, Simon, I really enjoyed our conversation today. I want to thank you for coming on and talking about some of the things that happened to you growing up, and how we don't have real capitalism now, and the people who are blaming all the problems in society and capitalism are incorrect. As I think we've outlined plenty during this interview, there are a lot of problems in society, but due to fiat currency and credit creation and government intervention regulation and not allowing these companies to go bankrupt, that it's created a ton of extra problems. And unfortunately, I think capitalism is being blamed when I don't think it's its fault.
I agree with you.
So Simon, if our listeners want to follow your work, how do they do?
They can follow me on Twitter. It's S_Mikhailovich, MIKHAILOVICH. They can look at the website, bullionreserve.com, and they can just Google me, and they'll find some videos and some reviews that I've done, and they can follow me this way.
Great. Well, I want to thank you again for your time today, and I think hopefully our listeners will enjoy having this more open discussion with someone who actually grew up in socialism, escaped it, and survived.
Thank you for having me.
Please like this video, share it with friends and family, and don't forget to subscribe to the Wall Street for Main Street YouTube channel if you have not already done so. Thanks for helping Wall Street for Main Street pass the 20,000 YouTube channel subscriber milestone despite YouTube censorship. Hopefully, we'll be able to get to 30,000 or even 40,000 YouTube channel subscribers quickly if YouTube doesn't shut down this channel. If YouTube does shut down this channel, remember to also sign up for the Wall Street for Main Street email list that's on the wallstreetformainstreet.com website and will tell you where the videos are going to be uploaded instead of YouTube. Also, if you really like the content and you decide that you want to give a one-time donation, you can go to wallstreetformainstreet.com, that's WALLSTFORMAINST.com website, where there's different options for you to do so. Or you can become a Patreon contributor. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to providing my loyal listeners with some of the best information, analysis, and financial education available out there, free or paid, as I work to grow the podcast and also get my educational technology company funded.